Hey, you come back. Welcome back, Warrior Next Door listeners. We hope that you'll enjoy this next episode because this is the one where Ted Kuykendall of the USS Nevada talks about his experiences from December 7th, 1941 and beyond. Enjoy.
I mean, could you describe the morning of December 7th? What occurred prior to the attack, and then when the attack occurred, where were you?
Well, we were at sea on maneuvers. We'd come back in Pearl the 5th December, and they brought an ammunition barge alongside, and they started taking off target ammunition. And I know that night the stern crane, they'd burned a solenoid out on it. And we worked on that thing till about 10 o'clock and got permission to take a shower. And then I went on mid-watch. I had to watch from 12 to 4, security watch, and I'm on mid-watch. Then after I got off watch, I went down my bunk and then got up chow time, and the starboard crane had trouble. We was up there on the starboard crane getting ready to start working on that when the band was assembled out on the fantail, and we heard all this machine gun fire and bombing and stuff over at Hickam Field. And of course our comment was that the Army's having drills on Sunday. They're stupid nuts, not knowing that what was actually happening until about that time. One of them made a pass across the ship, and old dude Cottrell says it's little blankety blank Japs, and so we all headed for our battle stations, and the band went ahead and finished colors. One of the band said he just left his instrument playing, he went below. And it was hectic then because, of course, there's only about 2 hours or so, but we were right behind the Arizona, and so old Boots and Hill was repair one. When I went in repair one, nobody had picked or plugged the phones into CIC.
What is repair 1 in CIC?
Well, we had different repair parties in ours. Repair one was right at the break of the main deck, and or the old heat ink stand. And Ed Hill was chief warrant boatswain, was more or less the head honcho in the repair party. And when I plugged the phones in, they reported that there was a torpedo hit frame 40 on the port side. Why, he walked in and said, "What was that?" And I told him, and he said, "All right, you and you set Z," which was set watertight integrity. So I went below decks to start closing up the watertight integrity as much. And then the bomb went off on the boat deck, and concussion came down, and I went across the compartment. And
so the concussion from the bomb actually knocked you down in below deck?
Yeah, of course, it went through the boat deck into the galley, and concussion open hatches, and I went zooming across the bunks and everything else. And when I crawled out of there, I went back up to the repair one, and it was gone. It had blown apart. I don't know where anybody was at, so I done various and sundry things, helped out where I could. Got some water from the guys in the sick bay. They was hollering for water. Went to the pantry and got some water.
Okay.
Wow.
So I found this amazing resource online. It's titled USS Nevada Torpedo and Bomb Damage, War Damage Report number 17, Bureau of Ships, Navy Department, 18th of September, 1942. And in it is a very specific timeline. And I just want to go through the timeline a little bit, and let's put what Ted's comments are in this timeline, if that's okay, Rhino.
Yeah, this is great.
All right,
we did something like this for the California, I think.
We did. Yes.
Yes.
So we have this amazing timeline, because when I first heard this, when I was editing these clips, I'm like, bomb blowing off, and what about the Arizona? They're right behind the Arizona. It blew up. Did he feel that? Right. So
that was one of the things I was wondering too. Does he describe at all at some point the feel of the blast of the Arizona? Anyway, go ahead.
So he talks about, the bomb that hit where near he was and the damage that it incurred and all that. Here's where the timeline goes. At 8 o'clock sharp, the Japanese attack. And if you know anything about Japanese culture, that's how they do, right? They're very, very punctual. Their trains run on time. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yep.
8 o'clock sharp, Japanese attack. At 8:06, the USS Arizona explodes. So in the first wave, 6 minutes after the first attack, they drop this 16-inch battleship shell from a plane. It pierces the magazine behind the number 2 turret, I think, 1 or 2 turret, the forward turret, one of them, on the Arizona, hits the magazine and blows it up. He never talks about the Arizona. He never talks about that explosion. You got to remember, he's below deck. He's going to talk in the next clip a little bit about what he felt when he didn't feel. But he never talks about the Arizona. And the Nevada was behind the Arizona, and the Arizona blew up in front of it. So, we know the blast was devastating. The Vestal, which was a repair ship, was alongside the Arizona. It had been bombed or torpedoed. It was on fire. And when the Arizona blew up, the force of the explosion actually extinguished all the fires on a USS Vestal. It was that freaking
sucked
big.
all the oxygen out of the air.
Exactly. So, and he's below deck. I'm not sure how he feels. So 8 o'clock Japanese attack, 8:06 USS Arizona explodes. At 8:10, 4 minutes later, a torpedo hits the port side of the USS Nevada between turret 1 and 2 in the front. And he talks about the torpedo damage. He says in that clip that we just heard that the bosun mate and his boss tells him to get below decks and start basically closing watertight doors and hatches. That's one of the reasons so many of our ships sunk in Pearl Harbor, is for Sunday inspections, most of the doors and hatches were open. And so there was no watertight integrity. So when they took that torpedo, he was part of the guys below the ship that was supposed to do that. That was at 8:10, the torpedo hits. At 8:40, the ship would get underway. And what I read...
My gosh.
Yeah, 8:40, they'd get underway. And what
40 minutes after the attack started.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm just I'm marveling at how long it did take them a while to get going.
And this ended up being fast because they already had a boiler running. What I read was, in order to get a boiler up to steam, it can take up to 7 hours. But because they had a boiler running and they were in the process of turning that boiler off to turn another one on, the only reason they had a boiler running was for electricity or some other maintenance they were doing. They were able to take that boiler and fire it up and get moving. So 8:40, 40 minutes of attack underway. At 9 o'clock, they're told by the Harbor Patrol to stop. They were making their way out of Pearl Harbor, and they were told to stop. So they're starting to slow down. An hour after the attack, they're getting ready to put anchors away. They got the crews out there to anchor this sucker just outside of Ford Island. And then around that same time, the second wave comes in. 2/3 of that wave veer off towards Nevada, and 5 bombs hit the ship while they're trying to slow down and anchor and stop and obey orders. And that's the bomb that he felt. One of those 5 bombs blew up near his battle station and made a mess of things. One of the bombs blew all the men off the front of the ship that were supposed to be dropping anchor, blew them off the ship. Now the ship is drifting. It's on fire. The fire would burn for more than 24 hours, and it drifts over to Hospital Point to the south, which is near the dry docks. And just as it beaches itself against Hospital Point, the USS Shaw, its magazine blows up. Mm-hmm. And pieces of the USS Shaw fall all over the USS Nevada. And that's going to matter because Ted has some souvenirs from this experience, and you're going to see what I think are pieces of the USS Shaw that he picked up from the deck. I continue. So that's around 9 o'clock. The ship is drifting. They're by Hospital Point. Finally, some tugs come over and push it across the channel into YPO Point. And that's where the ship would stick and stay and sink. And it wouldn't be raised again until February 12th. So the bomb that he felt, he never talks about hearing or feeling the USS Arizona explode. He's going to talk about the torpedo. I'm not going to steal that thunder. But the bomb was one of the bombs while the ship was basically trying to drop anchor based on an order that they got by the harbor patrol saying, do not leave, do not sortie out. And then they got bombed in the process of dropping anchor.
So I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Were they trying to make it out through the harbor mouth out to open water?
Yes.
Okay. We've talked about this before and wondered, was that really a good idea? You know, because in the end, it was fortuitous that these ships sank in shallow water.
Yep.
Around all of our facilities, around in an Army base or a Navy base, essentially, where they could bring all these equipment and men. They're all right there, and they could right these ships and refloat them and patch them and enter them back into service a year or two later.
All these, so the details, right?
Yeah.
He talks about the day or the night before Pearl Harbor. He was trying to fix a crane on the port side because the cylinder went out. He's an electrician, right?
Yeah.
So this is going to answer your question. That crane was offloading ordnance because they were out December 5th out on patrol. They come in, they offload ordnance. What I read was what they were doing is they were taking off these old 14-inch shells because there was new ones that the ordnance department just built that were bigger, they were heavier. They didn't have as much range, but they could penetrate more armor. And so their magazines were completely empty at this point. They have offloaded all of that. So why does that matter? As they go underway and they have a torpedo hit, someone decides that they need to flood the magazines, the forward magazines, because a torpedo hit between turret 1 and 2.
It was counter flooding. They were counter flooding to
but
right the ship.
They didn't need to do it. They didn't need to do it because there was nothing in the magazines, and all it did was cause more problems with the list and then slow the ship down. So here's a really interesting case where he gives you a little tidbit. And the cranes that he was working on, they were offloading those ammunition barges. So he was working on a broken crane that was taking the ammunition off the ship that allowed the ship to be empty while it was in port. It gets bombed. It gets torpedoed. Someone takes a decision to flood the forward magazine. They don't need to. It causes more problems for the ship later. And then as they're trying to leave the harbor, I think, and I have not read this with my recent research, I think it was because of what you said, Ryan. I think that they were worried about it sinking in the channel mouth and blocking the entire harbor.
So an interesting observation that I read about that. So of course the Nevada was trying to get out to open water. The Japanese saw that it was moving and it was making a break for it.
Yes.
Okay. And all of these bombers came in and dropped these 5 bombs on it, hoping to sink it in the mouth of the harbor. But in hindsight, that was not going to work. Even if they sank it in the mouth of the harbor, it's still 1,200 feet wide.
Yeah.
So it was not going to block the harbor. Even if the ship was long ways in it, it was not going to block the harbor. They still would have been able to use the mouth of the harbor to get in and out. So everyone, of course, in that high stress situation was trying to do, I think that the harbor patrol was, when they were saying, don't go out, first of all, they could have blocked. They probably were thinking they might block it. Second of all, they think, well, what are they going to do when they get out there? They're going to get sunk in deep water. We don't want that,
Right.
So anyway, it's interesting. I'm looking at right now. There's a page. It's the history.navy.military, and it's a page about the USS Nevada during the Pearl Harbor attack. And so this is from the U.S. Navy. And one of the things that states here, it lists a lot of the things you were just saying. They got underway at 8:40, about a half hour after she was torpedoed. She backed out, clear of her berth, began to steam toward the channel, down the channel toward the Navy Yard. The slowly moving battleship was an attractive target. which to the dive bombers, which hit and near missed her repeatedly, opening up her forecastle deck, causing more leaks in her hull, starting gasoline fires forward and other blazes in her superstructure and midships area. She was in serious trouble now, and then she ran aground on the Navy Yard side of the channel just south of Ford Island. As her crew fought her many fires, the ship twisted around until she was facing back up the harbor. With the help of the tugs, Nevada then backed across the way and grounded stern first on the other side of the channel. Her old, much modified structure proved itself to be anything but watertight, and water traveled inexorably throughout the ship. By the following day, she had settled to the bottom, fortunately in fairly shallow waters. There she would remain for 2 months until they righted her. And so, anyway, what mayhem was going on?
Totally. I mean, so if I'm sitting on the bridge of the ship, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing at 8 o'clock a bunch of planes come by. I'm starting to see ships get blown up. 6 minutes later, I'm taking a torpedo. No, not even that. 6 minutes later, I'm watching the USS Arizona immolate itself in front of my very eyes. It completely blows up. There's pieces spraying all over the harbor. And I'm like, oh, this is bad. And then and then 4 minutes after that, I take a torpedo and I'm thinking, we need to get the hell out of here. We get underway, we're making steam, we're heading out of this terrible thing, everything's blowing up. And then we're told to stop. While we try to stop, we get bombed. We drift over to Hospital Point. The freaking USS Shaw blows up next to us. And then harbor tugs finally crash us into the point across the channel. What mayhem. You used the word, I mean, I just can't even imagine how confusing that would have been.
Do you think that that our harbor patrol realized that it was that it was more acceptable to have the ships sink in the harbor than out in open water? Do you think that they were cognizant of that at that point? I mean, obviously they didn't want any ship to sink.
Yeah.
But, and I think that there must have been, when the Nevada broke free and was making a run for it, they were like, this could be bad. Stop. I mean, they could either block the harbor mouth or they could get out in deep water and
sink there.
And then sink there.
Yeah.
And maybe have a lot more loss of life.
Yeah, I really don't know, Ryan. That's a great, I don't know. I know that because of the battleships that were in the harbor and they sunk, including the Nevada, that we only lost 2 of them, the Arizona and the Oklahoma. The rest of them were raised, refitted, and would fight again. And if the Nevada did make it out of the channel mouth, where, of course, the water is deeper and had gotten sunk, the Nevada, that would have been it for it. So I don't know how cognizant they were of that time. I don't know if a lot of it was just, let's just keep our stuff here where we can see it and we'll deal with the aftermath, or if it was really someone thinking, hey, let's not let them out in the deeper water and get sunk because we'll never get them back. I don't know.
Okay.
So basically what he's going to talk about now, because he was below deck during Pearl Harbor attack, is when you finally had a chance to go topside at 10:30 or 11 o'clock a.m. on December 7th, what did you see? And this is what he said.
Yeah, when we went up topside, they had the bodies laid out there on the quarter deck. Now I went by to see if I could recognize anybody. And we lost 50 some odd people. And it was, some of them you could partially recognize, some you couldn't. And because when the body goes through a bombing, some of the parts and some is not there. And that, I guess, of course, that was the first time I'd ever seen that many deaths in one time. And it gets to you, and it affects some people different ways than does others. But that was just a fact of life, and we went on from there.
How many guys in total died in the Pearl Harbor attack?
Oh, I have that. So in the Pearl Harbor attack, so we lost, there were so here are the overall statistics. Pearl Harbor, United States side, 19 ships were sunk or damaged. 347 aircraft were damaged or destroyed. 2,403 servicemen died, most of them on the USS Arizona. and 1,178 people were wounded. That includes civilians. On the Japanese side, they lost 29 aircraft and 129 killed.
So, sorry, I may have missed it. So how many on the Nevada died?
Oh, on the Nevada, that I don't. I'll have to look that up between clips.
Okay, I've got it right here. I
go
just
ahead.
found it. Just found it. Over the course of the morning, Nevada suffered a total of 60 killed and 109 wounded.
So he probably saw pretty much all the dead. He's saying 50, right? And
Yeah.
then just recollecting, they put them all on that quarterdeck. I think that's what he's describing seeing. And he also describes not just seeing dead people, but not being able to recognize them because of what the bomb damage did to them.
It also says here 2 more men died aboard during salvage operations on February the 7th of 42. And when they were overcome by hydrogen sulfide gas from decomposing paper and meat.
That is our next clip, Ryan.
Okay, sorry, I did not know that.
That's a perfect segue. That's our next clip.
Well, as they was pumping the ship out, and as the water went down, it was an electrical division. And as the water went down, we'd see a motor or anything like that. We took the motor loose, sent it over to the yard for them to repair it, clean it up. And so they opened one compartment back aft, and the methane gas in there affected, I think, 4 people, and 2 of them fell down. George Clarkson. We had a plank owner on the ship, Pete DeVries. He was with him, and he went down. We lost those 2 guys due to the methane gas from the compartment that had been closed up for a long time.
Between the methane gas, wow. Okay.
It wham, and they pulled them. Everybody went up forecastle, and then after that, when we went through with the ship to do any repair, to get motors out and this, that, and the other, you had to go in the buddy system. You had to go 2 together, and each one of you wore a piece of litmus paper, and so you're supposed to keep your eye on your buddy's litmus paper all the time. And but that was the only thing. Out of Combat Div 1, which consisted of the Arizona, Oklahoma, and Nevada, and the Nevada was the only surviving ship. And I thought we were real fortunate because, well, 2/3 of the casualties out of Pearl was in Combat Div, out of Combat Div 1.
Yeah.
And it was Arizona and the Oklahoma. And so we only lost 50 some odd people. So as we was going out the channel, they tried to sink us in the channel, and all the bombing and stuff we took then. I think that we were very, very fortunate, and good Lord had his hand over us, I guess.
Boy, no kidding.
He
My
did.
gosh.
And that's something that most people don't think about. I didn't until I started interviewing survivors from like USS New Orleans. You often hear or read about the carnage that occurs during a battle, whether you're torpedoed or bombed or strafed or whatever. What's just as terrible, maybe in some ways more terrible, is what you don't hear is when these ships that don't get sunk but suffered immense damage, when they make it into port, you have to put people in there to clean them out.
Yeah.
And some of the most disturbing things I've heard as an interviewer have been from sailors telling me what they experienced when they had to go in with plastic bags and shovels
Yep.
to clean out an area where a bunch of men died.
Yeah. To be in such a confined space as you are on a ship, and you survive a kamikaze hit or a hit from a bomb. I was amazed he knew those guys' names.
Yes,
the
he
2
did.
guys that died from the methane. That kind of surprised me. It just goes to show how tight knit the group was. And I wonder, he talked about that they had litmus paper on the buddy system.
It's for H2O.
How much time is that going to give you? Does that give you 5 seconds, or does it give you a 30? I just wonder how much leeway you've got there when you start seeing your partners litmus paper changing colors.
Yeah, not much. So for our audience, Ryan and I work in the energy sector. We've had to visit well sites, and H2S is a hydrogen sulfide, is a compound that can be produced from decaying organic matter, which oil wells can have in certain areas in abundance. And of course, when they were on the ship doing this, you got to remember they pushed it against the point and it sank. And it was weeks before they could patch it up and lift it up. And some of these compartments were watertight, some weren't. So there was a lot of chemistry going on with a lot of organic matter. And I think our audience knows what some of that organic matter was. And it can produce methane gas and H2S. The thing that's insidious about H2S for our audience, Ryan knows this, is you only need like 10 parts per million to kill a human being. And it's heavier than air. So what happens a lot, like on well site, is H2S can make it to a depression in the ground, and someone might be working in that area and they die, and their friend will go in there. It's like, what's wrong? Are you okay? And then they die. And there's these terrible stories of these areas in the world where H2S is accumulated in a low, and there'll be 6 or 7 bodies in there. So this litmus paper was designed to detect that. And Ryan, I'm willing to bet it probably wasn't all that effective. I think it was effective in looking down and going, oh crap. Right. So it was,
gosh.
And he's going to talk a little bit later about what happened with the crew, and I think it's going to explain why he knew those names. But I thought it was really cool. This was not planned. We were like, hey, a couple men died, in the ship cleaning it out. And not only did he talk about it, he knew who the people were. So it was tight-knit.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and kick the next clip. In this one, it's basically, what did the harbor look like after the attack?
What about Pearl? When were you able to go back? I'm imagining you had to go back and forth between the harbor and the ship. Is that correct? Did you do much of that?
Oh yeah, we first couple of nights we slept over in the bowling alley over at Block Center, and then they moved us up in the bleachers when we slept up there. Then they built some barracks, and they moved us in the barracks, and this was while they were still working on the ship, and they transferred most of the crew. And I was among a handful that was left in our division. New people come aboard just before we left there to bring it back to the States. And they stayed on, a lot of them stayed on through the war.
Yeah, so that basically what those 2 clips are showing is when the ship was beached and sunk during the repair operations, most of the other crew, the ones that knew how to fire guns or the bosuns and all that, they were gone. They were reassigned to other ships, doing other things. But there was a small group of people, like electricians, which he was, who were stripping out electrical components, bringing them back to Pearl to get them repurposed. And by the way, the United States was amazing logistically. Their ability to design, pumps and motors that were the exact same across a whole variety of different ships was amazing. It really helped us get our ships back together again. So he's talking about the salvage process, and you hear him say, we were a small crew. There wasn't many of us there. And on February 12th, the ship would finally be lifted. It would finally be floatable again. And that's why I think he knew those guys' names, is because there wasn't as many people on the ship during that part of the operation.
Yeah. One thing I was going to say, there's a picture on the internet that shows the USS Nevada beached right after the attack. You see smoke coming out of it and everything. And I was trying to look at it because they were stating that that in that article that I had read, that they had backed in and run aground. But that doesn't make sense to me that you would do that. If you got a torpedo hit towards the front, that's where you'd be worried about taking on the most water. Wouldn't you want to run aground with your bow up out of the water, resting on an underwater reef or something like that? Because then you would perhaps be able to control the flooding a lot better that way. If you're able to get down there and close everything off, which they had some success doing. Anyway, I guess I have some questions. Like maybe the picture isn't showing the right perspective, but it seems to me like that's why they would want to run it aground bow first rather than stern first, which the article stated that they did. So I don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know if it was, they had the tugs that were literally moving this ship off Hospital Point and pushing it across the channel to YPO Point during the end of the attack. I mean, there were still planes flying around. Maybe it was just more of a let's just get this sucker jammed up in there. I don't know, Ryan. I really don't
So
know.
did they run it? So let me ask you this. Did they beach it first under its own power, and then the tugs came and got it and moved it across the channel stern first? Maybe they went bow first, and then they flipped it around.
So the resource that I quoted earlier from USS Nevada Torpedo and Bomb Damage has this really cool time lapse portrayal of the trace of the Nevada. And basically what happened is at 9 a.m. when they were told to cease and desist, they were not out of the channel. They were still across from Ford Island. And that's when they took those 5 bomb hits. They were supposed to drop anchor. They couldn't. Those guys got blown off the ship. And the ship drifted into Hospital Point. And then the Shaw blows up. And they're like, well, this isn't a good place to be. And we're kind of between, you know what I'm saying? They're between Ford Island and Hospital Point. So then these tugs came over, which is pretty amazing. I would have loved to interview these guys that ran these tugs. All this battles going on. They lost a tug during the attack to go ahead and separate ships that were on fire. And what they did with the Nevada is at roughly around 10:30, 2.5 hours after the attack, they jammed that sucker onto YPO Point.
Okay. Wow.
Chaos, mayhem, as you said.
Mayhem.
We're not done, Warrior Next Door listeners. This is just the end of part 2. We've got more on his experiences after Pearl Harbor, and then what he did during the war, the rest of the war, which was not trivial and just as amazing. So stay tuned and see you next week.